In the vast darkness off the coast of Peru, as the moon bids farewell to the dazzling LED lights deceiving the ocean, a hunt worth nearly $1 million begins. Not whales, not sharks, but giant squids surging up from the night. On the ship's deck, every passing second is a life-or-death gamble. 12 tons of squid in one night. Success is a treasure. Failure is nothing. The million-dollar race on the night sea. In the world of the ocean economy, there are journeys that are not simply about catching fish or harvesting seafood, but rather about hidden survival races where time, nature, and human beings are pulled into a fierce vortex. The giant squid hunt off the coast of Peru is a typical example. It is not a leisure trip into the ocean, nor is it a romantic adventure as many might imagine. It is a carefully calculated plan, a massive commercial gamble that can bring in nearly $1 million in just one night, or sweep everything away in the blink of an eye. As the mainland fades behind the horizon, the specialized fishing vessel silently cuts through the waves toward the deep sea. In the wheelhouse, navigation maps and data charts are spread out like chess pieces on an economic board, where every move must be calculated with precision down to each nautical mile. Such a voyage does not rely solely on the captain's experience, but is also the result of a series of investment decisions, from modern equipment, freezing systems, to a seasoned labor force. Every detail on that ship is converted into money, and every hour spent at sea quietly gnaws away at profits. Peru, with its abundant fishing grounds, has long become the hotspot of the global squid industry. More than 70% of the world's giant squid supply comes from these waters. That means any voyage is part of a global supply chain racing day by day. Japan, Europe, the US, all are waiting for perfectly preserved squid shipments, which will then be transformed into premium sushi, seafood pasta, or luxury dishes in five-star restaurants. And at the heart of that link are the small yet resilient vessels, betting everything to claim a share of the enormous commercial pie. For the crew, the pressure is not only the target of 12 tons of squid that must be reached, but also the economic meaning tied to it. In the coastal communities of Peru, or even further in American import companies, revenue from a successful haul can decide the wages of hundreds of workers, or even keep an entire processing line from shutting down. One successful night can open months of abundance, while one failure can leave behind heavy debts, pushing sailors' families into precarious situations. The dry numbers of the global economy are therefore written with the sweat, blood, and resilience of the people fighting offshore. The tense feeling of an economic race is multiplied by the natural setting surrounding them. The night sea is not at all peaceful. High waves, fierce winds, and overwhelming darkness all make the ship a fragile glowing dot in the vast ocean. Yet, it is in that very space that artificial lights are switched on to draw squids up from the deep. From then on, every moment of net hauling becomes a decisive point, either a victory bringing immense wealth or a failure turning all efforts into zero. Outsiders may see this as a dangerous job, but for those within, it is an essential link in the global trade system. The seafood economy is not just about catching fish. It is about bargaining between nations, about price fluctuations on the markets of New York or Tokyo, about fishing quota policies set by international organizations. Each ton of giant squid hauled up is not merely seafood. It is also a symbol of cash flow, of shifting economic power among continents. And that is why each voyage like this always carries the mark of a global political economic gamble, in which the offshore vessel is merely a representative of a much more complex chain of interests. When night falls, the sea roars, and the nets are prepared for release. The crew understands they are not only hunting squid, but also hunting for survival opportunities for themselves and for an entire industry depending on them. the captain and the courage amid the night sea. If every squid hunting trip off the coast of Peru is a fierce economic chess match, then the one holding the pieces on that board is the captain. He is not only the man steering the wheel, but also the soul of the entire vessel, the one holding the trust, the survival, and even the financial future of dozens of people. Here, the image of Captain Morales is not simply that of a sea leader, but a symbol of a generation of people who have merged life experience with global economic strategy. With more than 20 years adrift on the waves, Morales has learned to read the language of the ocean. To him, the radar map is not just cold, lifeless dots, but signals like the heartbeat of the sea. A sudden change of wind, an unusual rising current, all send him invisible messages. He can see what young sailors' eyes cannot. When the squids begin to surface, when to cast the nets, when to change course to avoid risks. In those moments, Morales is like a strategist at an international negotiation table, seizing each opportunity, weighing every decision, knowing that even the smallest mistake could cause the entire trip to end in ruin. Yet, his role does not stop at technical understanding and seafaring experience. What makes a captain a true leader is his ability to maintain discipline and morale for the whole crew. When the clock passes midnight, the sailors are still spinning in exhausting labor. Sweat mixes with the pungent smell of squid, calloused hands bleeding from cables. Each man carries within him fatigue, even fear. At that moment, Morales's calm gaze and resolute voice are the medicine that keeps them standing. He does not shout slogans, nor does he need flashy speeches. His steady presence is enough. For the sailors, that firmness is as important as any modern equipment on the ship. On another level, Morales is also the direct link connecting the small vessel to the larger flows of international trade. He understands clearly that each of his decisions does not just concern the crew's bonus, but also affects export contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars behind them. Each net he commands to be cast is like a trade deal signed on the open sea. He knows well that businesses in Lima, New York, or Tokyo are awaiting each frozen shipment. He is even conscious that his delays or failures could disrupt an entire supply chain, causing global squid prices to fluctuate. That role makes him an essential link in an economic picture far beyond the borders of Peru. Above all, the captain is not just the man holding the wheel, but also the one bearing the balance between risk and safety. Each night at sea is a gamble, pressing deeper to catch more squid, which also means facing stronger waves, or retreating earlier to protect the crew, but accepting less profit. The difficulty is not in understanding the laws of the sea, but in choosing the right decision when everything is uncertain. Here, Morales's courage shows most clearly. He knows when to risk, when to stop, when to accept losing a part to preserve the whole trip. Looking broader, the image of Morales reflects that of leaders in global political economy. Like American statesmen over the past decades, he is forced to make decisions under time pressure, with information that is never complete, and in an environment that is always unpredictably volatile. But instead of luxurious meeting rooms, his negotiation table is a squid-stained deck, and instead of signatures on documents, he leaves his mark through successful hauls. It is this blend of intellect, experience, and courage that turns a captain into a decisive factor in the entire economic value chain. And so, in the darkness of the ocean, when artificial lights still shine down upon the waters, no one aboard the vessel can deny that their future, and the fate of a nearly $1 million voyage, rests firmly in the strong hands of that captain. The fake moon on the ocean. If the role of the captain is the heartbeat guiding the whole ship, then the weapon deciding success or failure of the journey lies in an invention that seems simple: light. It is artificial light, not nets or machines, That is the key for humans to step into the hunting grounds of the giant squid. In the thick darkness, when the sky holds not a single star and the sea is nothing but endless black, the powerful LED lights from the deck suddenly flare up, as if raising a fake moon right in the middle of the ocean. Squids are silent predators, bound to darkness all their lives. They rise from the depths when night falls, using the shadows to ambush small prey. But humans, with cunning and patience, have learned how to bend that rule. Through modern lighting technology, fishermen create an illusion. The night is still young, the moon still hangs high, and this is the perfect moment for squids to continue hunting. It is that primal instant that turns giant squids into willing victims, lured close to the vessel like moths rushing into fire. Yet, light is not simply a trap. It is a sophisticated blend of science and art. How strong must the intensity be to attract without alarming the squid? At what angle should the beam strike so that the light pierces deep into the water, touching the creatures in hiding? How should the distance between each cluster of lamps be calculated so as not to create abnormal shadows that drive the squid away? Everything demands near-perfect precision, like a grand play in which humans must arrange every stage effect so that the audience, in this case the squid, joins at exactly the right time. In every moment, the tension on deck is no different from the atmosphere in a missile control room. The lighting engineer checks the wattage, the mechanic monitors the bulb temperatures, the sailors watch the water's surface. A single small malfunction, a broken bulb, a wrong intensity, and the whole school of squid could vanish without a trace, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars with them. That is why fishermen often say, "Light is the invisible net, the real net is only the final step." On another level, the light strategy reflects how humans have learned to manipulate nature in order to survive. It is not simply about catching squid, but also a profound lesson in economics and politics. By creating an artificial moon, humans prove they can reset the rules, turning disadvantage into advantage. And it is precisely this that has transformed squid hunting from a gamble into a global industry worth billions of dollars. Seen from afar, the shimmering white lights on the sea look like a floating city, where each lamp is a symbol of commercial ambition reaching far beyond land. However, it must also be admitted that using light to control the behavior of marine creatures inevitably raises questions about the environment and ecological balance. When squid are lured up more than they naturally would be, when they are pulled away from their natural hunting cycles, will the ocean ecosystem suffer harm? This is not only a concern of marine scientists, but also a long-term challenge of political economy. An industry may grow rapidly thanks to technology, but if it does not account for the limits of nature, today's prosperity may become tomorrow's crisis. But in the instant when the lamps switch on, when the sea suddenly glimmers like a mysterious ball, those long-term questions are set aside. On deck, every gaze is fixed on the glowing patch of water, where squid bodies shimmer, reflecting silver light. It is the tensest moment. The squid have been lured, the nets are about to be cast, and the whole ship seems to hold its breath. In that brief instant, light is not only a tool, but also hope. Hope that an entire sleepless night, an entire million-dollar voyage, will be rewarded with a heavy haul of nets. That is why, in the vast darkness of the ocean, artificial light is not only a fake moon deceiving the squid, it is also a symbol of human intellect and ambition. The ambition to master the sea, to master rules once thought unchangeable, and to turn endless night into priceless economic opportunity. The night sea and the gamble for survival. If artificial light is what pulls giant squids up from the deep sea, then the dark side of the ocean is always lurking, ready to swallow the ship at any moment. Because the sea, especially the night sea, has never been a complete ally. It is both a massive treasure and an abyss waiting to bury everything. And between those two extremes, the crew must strain themselves on a fragile boundary, where a single fierce wave is enough to turn $1 million catch into nothing. When night fully covers, the sea is not only pitch black, but also more unpredictable than ever. Waves twice the height of the ship, rising suddenly like walls of water, can crash down in an instant. Each time the deck shakes violently, seawater floods in as if to sweep everything away. For fishermen, that is the moment requiring not only physical strength, but also steel will. They must hold tightly to the ropes to avoid being swept away, while also staying calm so that panic does not turn into a deadly mistake. But fierce waves are not the only enemy. The night sea wind often changes direction suddenly, blowing strong enough to tear apart nets worth tens of thousands of dollars, or even push the ship off the position of the squid school just discovered. Only a few minutes off course, the whole school may vanish into the darkness, and the entire night's chance is lost. In an industry where each hour is worth tens of thousands of dollars, the sudden fury of nature is nothing less than a fatal blow to the economy. And not only that, there is another invisible enemy: time. Squid are extremely sensitive to temperature. If they are not processed within a few dozen minutes after leaving the sea, they will lose freshness, which means losing export value. Therefore, every time big waves slow down the hauling of nets, the crew not only worries about their own safety, but also becomes haunted by the image of squids gradually spoiling in the storage tanks. For them, every drop of sweat falling onto the deck is a race not only against the sea, but also against the clock, counting down every second. Risks also come from the very nets themselves. Each squid net set is worth as much as a car. When they are cast into the deep sea, the weight of steel frames, cables, and floats all press heavily on the winch system. One slip of the rope, one sudden crack, could mean that the entire catch worth hundreds of thousands of dollars gets dragged down to the bottom of the ocean. At that moment, not only is the opportunity to fish gone, but also a financial wound so huge it can turn the whole trip into a heavy loss. In the most dangerous moments, the difference between success and disaster lies in the ability to unite. The crew is no longer separate individuals, but a single entity, operating smoothly like a machine. One ties ropes, another holds the lever, another watches the water's surface, all relying on one another to resist the overwhelming power of the sea. There, sweat, fear, and trust merge into one, keeping the ship from breaking apart under the ocean's fury. The night sea, therefore, is like a giant casino. Every net cast is a card placed in a bet, while the wind and waves are the cold dealer. Humans may have experience, artificial light, modern machinery, but in the end, fate is still decided by a force beyond control. And it is precisely that uncertainty that creates the special weight of each voyage. When the ship returns at dawn with a full hold of squid, it is not only an economic victory, but also proof of the courage to overcome every challenge that nature hurls in humanity's face. The awakening of limits. If the early chapters of the story were about the weakening of trust and the crumbling of America's economic and political pillars, then in this stage, what is unfolding is the awakening of limits that Washington has long believed it could surpass. For decades, the U.S. has always believed that the dollar was the ultimate power, that every economy in the world would forever revolve around the greenback, like the moon around the earth. But, at this moment, cracks have clearly appeared in that wall of belief. Loyal partners are gradually pulling away from orbit, while allies once thought impossible to leave are now beginning to calculate their own paths. What is striking is not only the shift in trade relations, but also the change in the structure of trust. If in the past, nations still accepted dependence on the U.S. in exchange for stability, now they have realized that such stability is no longer as certain as before. A government can change the rules of the game with a single tweet. A tariff line can be imposed within hours without a long-term strategy. So how can anyone rely on that to build a future? It is this instability that has ignited the question, what are the real limits of American power? In distant conference rooms in Asia, Europe, even Africa, people have begun to discuss a post-dollar world. Not as a fantasy scenario, but as a trend sprouting from small transactions, from contracts signed in euros, in yuan, or even in gold and commodities. These seemingly trivial changes are the grains of sand gradually tilting the clock of American power. And when the hand tilts, it no longer tells the right time for the world, but only ticks to Washington's own rhythm. But the world alone cannot be blamed. Part of the cause lies within America itself. Deepening political polarization, endless battles in Congress, repeated government shutdowns simply because a budget cannot be agreed upon. All have weakened the image of a stable superpower. To other nations, America is no longer a reliable leader, but only a partner that can change its stance at any time. The shadow of protectionism, of the America First slogans, has unintentionally turned into a barrier that awakens other nations. They need a way out, an alternative choice. In that context, what America is losing is not just market share or export revenue. What they are losing is far more dangerous: the right to define the rules of the game. Once the rules are no longer set by the U.S., but shared by multiple centers of power, Washington's strength will be sliced into pieces. When Canada signs its own treaty with Asia, when Europe negotiates with South America without the U.S., when new shipping routes connect Africa and the Middle East without passing through America's traditional ports, all are fragments of a world gradually stepping out of America's orbit. But the paradox here is this: America itself has awakened the limits that could have been concealed longer. Tariffs, trade wars, threats to withdraw from agreements. All are like headlights shining straight into a room long accustomed to darkness. When the light comes on, the world sees the cracks that were once hidden. And once seen, they cannot close their eyes as if they never knew. This awakening is not loud, not happening overnight. It smolders, but surely, and day by day, it changes how the world views America. If Washington once was the gatekeeper of the system, now it is gradually being pushed into the role of one player among many. That is not only the loss of power, but also the shock of a nation long accustomed to a singular position. And when the dream of no limits has reached its end, the U.S. is forced to face a reality. No one, not even a superpower, can walk forever without colliding with the limits of their own. Repositioning power in the global order. If Canada's earlier steps only bore the mark of self-assertion, then at this stage, the Maple Leaf Nation is actively repositioning its power within the entire global order. No longer just a cautious player, standing at the edge of the chessboard, Canada now chooses to step into the center, placing strategic pieces decisively, and in many cases, forcing opponents to recalculate their moves. The first thing that makes this shift clear is how Canada turns traditional weaknesses into new strengths. In the past, dependence on the U.S. market was seen as the Achilles heel of its economy. But after a series of trade shocks, Canada transformed that vulnerability into momentum to open its doors to the world. Bilateral and multilateral trade agreements were signed one after another, no longer carrying the appearance of cautious expansion, but embodying a bold vision, not allowing any superpower to lock its vital lifeline. As Mexico, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific gradually became key trading partners, Canada not only escaped the shadow of dependence, but also built a multi-layered network strong enough to withstand political and economic storms. But this repositioning is not only taking place on the trade front. It also lies in how Canada presents a value system to assert its role. If the U.S. is often remembered as a superpower built on military strength, and China stands out with manpower and market scale, then Canada has chosen the path of building a brand based on soft power, international credibility, leadership in climate issues, and an image of stability and reliability. This is how Canada, without noisy shows of force, still manages to draw the international community to its side at critical moments. One of the most vivid proofs of this strategy is how Canada handled the global energy crisis. When the world fell into instability caused by conflicts and supply competition, Canada not only acted as an alternative supplier, but also seized the opportunity to strengthen its image as a guide for the clean energy trend. Massive investments in hydrogen, storage batteries, and renewable energy were not simply to serve domestic needs, but also sent a message. Canada wants to become a pillar in the global energy revolution. On the diplomatic chessboard, the change is equally evident. Canada began to join alliances not with the mentality of a little brother needing protection, but with the status of a nation with its own voice, sometimes strong enough to alter negotiation outcomes. From G7 and WTO forums to bilateral meetings with partners in Africa and the Middle East, Canada consistently chose the strategy of not standing aside, a striking shift from its cautious image in the past. Yet, this repositioning is not a smooth journey. Canada still faces internal challenges, a population that is not too large, military strength not yet enough to compete with superpowers, and especially domestic political divisions when forced to choose between safety in America's orbit and venturing into an uncertain world. But it is precisely within these contradictions that Canada's resilience is forged, for a nation cannot truly mature within the comfort zone. Looking at this stage, it is clear that Canada has moved beyond the limits that once confined it. From a country defined by its proximity to a superpower, it is now rewriting its own definition within the global order. Not noisy, not ostentatious, but every step carries calculation and ambition. And that makes the image of the red maple leaf today not only associated with peace, but also with a spirit ready to shape the future. A turning point in strategic thinking. If the previous stage marked an awakening and the assertion of independent will, then here Canada enters a new turning point, not merely reacting to upheavals, but proactively shaping the rules of the future. This does not unfold noisily, but is expressed through long-term strategies where every step is calculated to both escape the shadow of the U.S. and build a sustainable foundation for itself. One of the most profound changes is the shift in economic thinking. If in the past, Canada was accustomed to looking southward as the default for safety, from consumer markets to capital flows, then now they gradually realize that true safety does not lie in relying on a superpower, but in diversification. The question is no longer how to protect against U.S. pressure, but rather, how can Canada become a pillar of its own in the global system? This very question opened the door to a series of new policies, from promoting trans-Pacific trade linkages to building bilateral agreements with countries that had previously received little attention. In this process, the image of Mark Carney once again became symbolic. He was not only a skillful coordinator at the negotiation table, but also the one who sowed in Canadian politics and business a belief that self-reliance was no longer a slogan, but something measurable in numbers, contracts, and cargo ships leaving Vancouver straight to Africa or South America. Carney often emphasized that the strength of a nation in the 21st century does not lie in shouting louder, but in building a network of relationships that opponents cannot easily break. This mindset has changed how Canada perceives its own position. They no longer see themselves only as America's gentle neighbor, but begin to define themselves as a new balancing point between power blocks. In an increasingly polarized world, Canada chooses the path of multi-centeredness, maintaining a relationship close enough with Washington not to become an open adversary, while extending its reach to Asia, Africa, and even South American economies that are eager for technological and infrastructural support. This turning point is not without risks. Every step carries the potential backlash from the U.S., a nation unaccustomed to its northern neighbor slipping beyond control. Yet, instead of fearing, Canada chooses a flexible strategy, not challenging directly, but asserting itself through small, steady successes. A new agreement signed with Indonesia, a shipment of powdered milk exported to Nigeria, or a green technology project partnered with Brazil. All are pieces of a larger picture. At a deeper level, this is also a transformation in national identity. Canadians are beginning to speak of their country's new role with a different kind of pride. If in the past, self-esteem was often tied to the image of, "We are more civilized, decent, and peaceful than the U.S., now it is tied to the aspiration of, "We can draw our own path and bring the world to us." From young entrepreneurs in Toronto to farmers in Saskatchewan, all can feel the new current, a belief that their efforts will not only serve a single market, but a network broader than ever before. This turning point, therefore, is not only a story of politics and trade. It is the story of how a smaller nation dares to stand tall before the pressure of a giant, and beyond that, dares to dream of a future in which they are not only participants, but rule-makers. And that is the very moment of transformation, when Canada abandons the role of loyal companion to become a strategic player with a voice of its own on the global chessboard.